Caribe Radio nos proponemos ser la emisora online calificada para ser la mejor opción en comunicación para usted. Nos preparamos en noticias, deportes, cultura, música y de entretenimiento general para que usted esté conectado todo el tiempo con nosotros. Caribe Radio ofrece el mejor servicio de comunicación digital para que las empresas se hagan visibles a diferentes públicos. Desde lo público trabajamos para el servicio y por el servicio social. Caribe Radio Online nos entrenamos día a día para brindar la mejor opción en producción de medios digitales. Caribe Radio, la radio del futuro.
Los conceptos, productos y servicios del siguiente espacio son responsabilidad del director del programa y no representan el pensamiento de esta emisora.
Hello, everyone. This is Conversations with Authors, part of Books Over Drinks. We're an online community dedicated to fostering a passion for books and provide a platform for both authors and readers to exchange ideas and discuss their work. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Emily Balcetis. She's a professor of psychology at New York University. Her research focuses on visual perception and how small differences in the way that we perceive the world can have major implications in our motivation and the perseverance towards achieving these goals. Dr. Balcetis' most recent book, Clearer, Closer, Better, examines the physiological, cognitive, and behavioral aspects that impact how effective we are at setting up, visualizing, materializing, monitoring, and achieving our personal and professional goals. The book assembles numerous scientific studies, stories of highly achieving people, and Dr. Balcetis' own personal experience with a hint of self-deprecating humor and very funny stories, I might add, making the book not just very entertaining, but also quite insightful, unpacking a treasure trove of science-based resources we can all use to condition ourselves in order to achieve physical and cognitive goals. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and as always, thank you for watching and listening. Dr. Balcetis, it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to chat today.
So let's start with a bit of a broad question to set the context for the rest of the book. And it's about understanding what is the relationship between our perception of the world, how we see it, and our ability to set, visualize, and achieve goals.
Well, I think vision is a really special sense. I'm not alone. There are a lot of scientists and a lot of data that agree with that vision is unique. It's special. There's more neurological real estate taken up by our sense of vision than any other sense. Like more square footage of our cortex is consumed by visual processing than how we feel, what we smell, what we hear, any motor movements. I mean, vision is special in the brain. And when we look at the world around us, we have an incredible ability for those of us that have the power of sight to see really amazing things. You can see the International Space Station in the sky 250 miles away. You can see a flicker of a candle if the atmosphere is clear, if the sky is if there aren't clouds and fog and smog in your way. Like over 30 miles away, you can see that flickering candle. It's incredible what we can pick up on and how powerful our eyes are. So there's that. But what's also cool is that we have this, what people are calling a naive belief, a naive realism that what we see is exactly what is out there. But that's not the case. When we start unpacking what does the world really have in it and what do we experience seeing, there's a disconnect, but we don't know it. Right? Because you get the experience all the time of like talking with somebody and you've heard them wrong and they correct you, or like tasting something amazing and you're trying to figure out what the chef put into it and you know that you can't quite get all the ingredients right. So with all our other senses, we have the opportunity to know that we're not getting the story right or not having the whole picture explained to us, but that almost never happens with vision. It's not like I'm sitting here talking to you guys and then like, oh, I thought it was you, but it's actually my mom. Like that never happens, that you see the world wrong and you get that feedback to tell you that you had made a mistake. So in that sense, that's another way in which vision is unique. And that contributes to our belief that what I see is what is out there. But as you'll read in the book, there are lots of examples of where that's not really the case. And when we start to open up that possibility, then you realize like, oh, the world isn't quite what I think, but there's power in that. We can leverage that knowledge to help us do some pretty amazing things, like overcome obstacles that we didn't even know or didn't even see existed before.
Fantastic. I love that story talking about how we see the world that you describe of Dave Chiluli, the artist, and how just after he lost the vision of one of his eyes, he kind of like he changed the way that he perceived the world, or that's the way that he said it, and also changed the way that he actually delivered his art.
Yeah, he's an incredible story, right? He's a glass blower. If you aren't familiar with his work, for those of you that are listening to this, definitely look into it. It's just beautiful what he does. And of course, for glass blowing, right, you're blowing into a tube, you're holding something that's really heavy. The pipe is really heavy, and so is the glass that's at the end of it. And you're trying to see as you're swinging it around and blowing more air in and putting it back into all of the, I don't even know the right words. I'm not an artist, the glory hole and all the other bits that you use to make that art. It takes a lot of physical stamina. He had lost the use of one of his arms in a body surfing accident, and in a horrible car accident, he lost the power of sight in one of his eyes. And so he couldn't see and he couldn't really hold his tools anymore. And after both of those things happened, like you're saying, he had this powerful reaction, and he said, I needed to see a different perspective. I needed to see a new way to do my art. And in some sense, he meant that literally. He needed to be able to see it differently, because now he was seeing the world differently, but also metaphorically. He needed to find a new way. And I think, a lot of us probably can't relate directly with that story, that we're not artists. We didn't have a body surfing accident. We didn't have a horrific car accident either. And maybe we do have the power of both of our eyes, but we have been in that position where we're up against a major obstacle. It feels like a roadblock or a wall that's in front of us, and we have no idea how we're going to get around it. And so that part of the story, I think a lot of us can resonate with. And rather than throwing in the towel, saying, I quit, this is too hard, or I guess I'm not the kind of person who can do this anymore, things that a lot of us say to ourselves when we're up against these major obstacles, he didn't. And he reinvented his art. He reinvented the way he approaches art and found a new way to continue on with his passion.
Very interesting. Yeah. So I think that kind of connects with goal setting, which is something you discuss a lot in your book. We sometimes set goals that seem too hard or far to achieve, and its pursuit often ends up demotivating us, right? Setting one that isn't just like far too easy, and that might also demotivate us, is also a challenge. Why do you think that happens? And how can we find that balance between being too hard and being too easy?
Yeah, I think this story, to me, I sort of think of it in my mind as similar to that children's folk story or fairy tale about Goldilocks. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. She breaks into their house and when they're gone, and in the end, she tries out all their different beds, right? This one's too hard, this one's too soft, and this one is just right. And she does that for everything in their home, right? Until she finds the one that's just right, somewhere in the middle. And when we think about setting goals, the Goldilocks principle applies here as well. We don't want to set goals at a level that's too easy, and we don't want to set them at a level that we conceptualize as impossible or too hard. We need to find that sweet spot in the middle. Now, why? So the behavioral science coupled with studies of physiology give us good insight into why that is. If we set goals that are impossible, that feel impossible, then we give up often before we've even started. We just think, I have no idea. I don't know, what am I going to do? How am I going to approach it? Motivation stays really low because it just seems like I can't take a step that big. I don't know whether to go left, right, forwards, or backwards first. If a goal is set too easy, then we're just not inspired to take it on. I mean, I'm sure people who like writing to-do lists find that on occasion there is something that's really simple that they just never cross off that list. It's like, oh, what? I just never get to this thing that won't take me any time. I just never get to it. Why is that? Because it does feel too easy. We don't carve out the time. We know we're not going to get like a sense of excitement when we accomplish the thing that we know won't be very difficult or won't challenge us or won't be that rewarding to accomplish because we figured we could do it all along. So when you look at the motivation, that kind of makes sense. We probably all have those kinds of reactions, or we can share in those sentiments. What's interesting is that colleagues of mine at New York University studied what happens in our body when we set goals at these different levels of difficulty. Now, what they measured physiologically is systolic blood pressure. That's the top number on your blood pressure reading. And what it indicates beyond, in addition to a number of things, but psychologically, it's a marker of our body's readiness to do something. Now, people have first discovered this within animals. So horses that are on the brink of racing and going out of the gates and race around the track, they're not moving. They're stuck in their stalls those moments before the gates open, but their systolic blood pressure goes up in anticipation of racing. The same is true with human runners and races. They're at the starting blocks. They're not moving, but systolic blood pressure goes up in anticipation of running. Scientists have also studied this with things that wouldn't be about future physical movement, but simply cognitive effort. You're about to do a really difficult math problem. Systolic blood pressure goes up. You're sitting there before, you're going to be sitting there doing the problems, but you know you're going to need a lot of investment and motivation to focus on this challenging task. Systolic blood pressure goes up. So that's what we know about what systolic blood pressure means psychologically. And what my colleagues at New York University found is that systolic blood pressure stays pretty low when a goal is easy. When what I'm about to do doesn't take very much effort, my body doesn't need to gear up to do anything. Systolic blood pressure stays low. Systolic blood pressure also stays low on those very challenging tasks as well. We set a goal that's too hard, systolic blood pressure also stays low. When our mind is saying like, I don't think I can do this, our body is saying, well, fine, if you're not even going to try, neither am I. Systolic blood pressure stays low. But systolic blood pressure is high at that Goldilocks moment, when you set goals that are moderately challenging, but not impossible, when you feel like, oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to be a little bit hard. I'm going to have to push myself to get there. Systolic blood pressure, our body responds in a way to sort of give us the energy that we need to do our best job on this thing that we're motivated, excited, and eager and ready to do.
Now, this ties a lot into the topic of vision boards, which I think is a big misconception we all have. Your book debunks several ideas, by the way, not just that one, that are extremely ingrained in our minds. And we're led to believe that just simply envisioning our future has a major effect on the drive towards achieving it. So can you tell us why is this not the case, or why do, for example, vision boards are just not enough on its own?
Sure. I don't want to alienate people who use vision boards. They're very popular. This is a common tactic that people use to figure out what is it that I want in my life, and then to motivate themselves to go for it. So let me just, before I answer your question, a few brief notes in advance that, like, for a lot of people, that is a challenge. Knowing what they want and what their vision for the future is, what their big dreams are, what their bucket list for life is, that can be hard for people to figure out. And so going through that process of, collecting imagery, reflecting what does your perfect career look like? What does it look like to be in good shape for you and in good physical health? What do your friendships look like? What do you want out of life? Going through that process can be challenging and can be important. We need a vision for the future. The problem is that some philosophies, some perspectives on what do you do with that vision board suggest putting that positive energy out into the world is going to bring you positive results. And that's where I say, let's question that. And maybe the data don't pan out. Some say that that is the end goal. Stating what the goal is, bringing that positivity into your life, the means to accomplishing it will find their way into your world. And that's just not the case. So the problem is, if we use a vision board to articulate what we want, and then stop the process of goal setting there, we do ourselves a disservice. So what we need to do instead is determine, what is it? What is it that I'm working towards? What is my big goal? That's step one. Dream big. That's important. But also in those same sessions, when we're thinking about what do I want in my life, we have to couple that with concrete action planning. We need to think, okay, here's where I am now. Here's where I want to be. What are some sub goals I can set? What are concrete actions I can take to take me from here to here, then here to here, then here to here? We need to do that concrete action planning so that we know which path we're going to go down, and we know what we need to do to get the job done. But there's a third step as well that we need to take on to motivate ourselves and to increase the odds of success. And that's planning for the obstacles. I call it foreshadowing failure. And what might be counterintuitive to some people is that foreshadowing failure when you're doing the vision board and when you're setting those goals actually is really helpful. Now, some people say, like, what do you mean? It's going to help me motivate myself to, like, think about what my perfect life is going to look like, and then how the 17 different ways that I'll fail as I'm trying to get there. And it will. It does. And and I understand that that sounds counterintuitive, but it doesn't sound counterintuitive if I were to say, like, come up with a plan B, come up with a plan C, come up with a plan D. That's just being prepared. And that's the idea of foreshadowing failure. If when you're setting your goals and thinking about concretely, what can I do to help myself get there? And you take time to think about, here's where a challenge is going to be. If I experience this obstacle, this stumbling block, I'm going to do this instead, or I'm going to do this. Coming up with those contingency plans, those backup plans, increases the odds that we can push through those obstacles and that we don't quit on our goal when we face them. When we're experiencing an obstacle, oftentimes that's when resources are most thin. When we have something that's unexpected, we didn't plan on meeting this challenge at this point in our life or this part of our day. We oftentimes don't have the time to figure out, how do I work through this? We may not have the money if it requires money, or the support or the other resources to troubleshoot this issue in this moment when we're also trying to put out the fire. But if we've come up with that plan B or plan C in advance, we can more quickly and easily pivot to push through that obstacle rather than it having be the point in time that we give up. So vision boards do work for helping us figure out what it is that we want out of life, and that's important. But we have to add on concrete action planning and foreshadowing failure.
Now, for the action planning, that brings up the topic of in your book, one of the examples is how just simply asking the right questions can make a big difference between thinking about a goal and actually achieving it. And that translates on, well, it could translate what we're talking about, intention to vote, to actually casting a ballot, or if you're a student preparing for a test, in actually sitting and achieving a certain goal there. So is it because it forces us to go through the mental exercise of thinking about the steps in order to achieve it?
That's helpful for sure. Once we, visualize, like, what is it like to cast a ballot? And somebody asks you the question, do you plan on voting on November 7th or whatever day? And just asking that question, to answer it, we oftentimes, sort of come up with a visual. Okay, November 7th. All right. Yeah, it's going to be kind of cold outside. This is where I vote. It's going to, I'm going to be walking there. Even if for an instant, our mind starts generating a picture of what that might look like. And, people they are more inclined to say, yes, I'll vote, than people who actually vote. There is a discrepancy there. But having mentally positioned yourself in that activity increases the odds that you actually do it, especially if you've articulated that you'll do it. You sort of have created a contract with whoever you're answering the question to, but also with yourself, creating that visual of what this action looks like. The science has shown increases the odds of voting by about 3%. Okay, now 3% might not sound like a lot. Only 3% more people vote after having visualized it than if they hadn't visualized it. But just think about the margin of error, or the difference, not margin of error, but the difference in vote counts between candidates who win and who don't, especially in a two-party system like America has. That often those big races are often decided by less than 3% of the vote. So shifting a population by 3% actually translates into to significant differences in real outcomes.
Interesting. So another idea your book discusses is positive feedback. What does science tell us exactly, or what does your research findings tell us exactly about positive feedback and feedback in general?
So this is a big topic, and it's a really controversial one because it pulls upon a lot of different issues and societal issues that we've grappled with. One of them is the self-esteem movement that oftentimes appears in schools, or it might show up in therapy if you've ever gone through therapy, or the way that we just talk with our friends, that we think what we need to be doing is bolstering each other up. That was a big movement in the 80s and 90s in some school districts, some states in the United States. The thinking here was if we just give kids enough self-confidence, they're going to be able to weather the obstacles. And they'll have like a reserve of energy then that will be needed if they experience challenges or failures. They'll believe in themselves and they can just push through it. So let's just make sure kids feel good, or that we as adults just feel good about who we are. That totally backfired. It wasn't effective. It didn't increase kids' performance in schools. It didn't help them learn more. And in fact, a lot of evidence says that it backfires. Why would that be? That encouraging self-esteem actually decreases the odds of success, academically or otherwise. Because what it does is create the wrong mindset and sort of personal narrative about yourself. If we start thinking in these fixed terms like, I'm a good person, I am a capable person, I'm a math person, like this is who I am. When you experience an obstacle and that's the way you think about yourself, like for me, I'm a psychologist. I'm a behavioral scientist who studies psychology. My very first test in college was in an intro to psychology, and I got a D-. I got the lowest grade in the whole class. Essentially I failed. I failed the test. Now, if at that point in my life I had thought I'm a psychologist and I get that kind of feedback, not positive feedback, negative feedback, I probably would think, oh, my narrative about myself is wrong. I must not be a psychologist because psychologists should be able to do well on an introduction to psychology test. That's the problem with positive feedback, just working to bolster people's self-esteem without also giving them the skills that they need to get a job done, is that it can be really overwhelming and debilitating when you experience an obstacle. Everyone will experience obstacles, but it's what do you do with that obstacle, with the challenge or with the failure, the D- that you get, that dictates whether you continue to persevere in that area. So positive feedback can be dangerous because it could lead us to thinking in more fixed terms, where we start describing ourselves with labels, ourselves in trait-like words. I'm a math person. I'm an artist. Because then when somebody gives us feedback that suggests, well, maybe you're not as good an artist as you think you are, or maybe you're not as great in all areas of math as you thought you were, that can lead to a major shakeup. We have a really hard time accepting this experience if it undermines our sense of self. We also don't learn as well when people only focus on what our strengths are. It's experiencing those challenges and being given the resources, working towards having those resources to know what to do with those challenges where the most learning happens. So knowing, oh, here's the sticky spot. Here's where it's hard for me. This is where I need to focus my effort. And these are the mentors that will support me along the way. And here's how I'm going to set aside time to learn how to overcome this challenge. That's where the greatest options and opportunities for learning exist. So for so many reasons, just giving or receiving positive feedback can do a disservice to who we think we are, to whether we continue to persevere through obstacles or not, and whether we really learn.
Nice. Well, as a millennial, I find that very interesting, right? Because we're often taught to receive positive feedback, and when we receive negative feedback, we don't know how to what to do with it, and that sort of brings up the idea of mindset, which you touch upon on your book also, and you mentioned Carol Dweck's famous book Mindset, and I found that very interesting, and how you connect your research to her own research. Would you maybe like to talk a bit more about that?
Sure. So exactly what we're talking about here is the idea of mindset, that it can be challenging for us to think in those kind of fixed terms, using those labels to describe ourselves. Now, one of the challenges with negative feedback is in the words that we often use when we're trying to make sense of that experience. We use the words like failure. Maybe somebody doesn't say you're a failure, because we tend to not be that direct and mean to each other by saying that to somebody. But we might say that to ourselves, like, oh man, I'm a failure. I failed that test. I failed this experience, because failure has such a negative connotation. And when I'm saying like we should foreshadow failure when we're setting our goals, people might have a cringy, like, ugh, like I don't even want to think about that kind of word reaction. And that's because there is so much baggage about that word failure. You can take the same concepts, the same ideas about negative feedback, foreshadowing failure, or failure itself, and just use different language, but take advantage of what really can come when we focus on areas for growth, an alternative to using the word failure or weakness. Well, if we conceptualize our struggles or our failures as opportunities for growth, then it doesn't seem so aversive to receive negative feedback. It's almost as if you should thank the person who gives you that negative feedback, because they have done the hard work of telling you this is where you should focus your time and your effort. This is where the challenge is for you. Rather than doubling down on the thing you already know how to do well, here's where you should focus your efforts. So I think, part of a reaction to like, I wish I only got positive feedback. I should only give negative feedback. I don't like receiving criticism or negative feedback, is because we might be using words to describe or internalize that experience that have all this baggage. They are like failures. We should work to reconceptualize, reconstrue what we think of this experience of receiving negative feedback to mean. Instead, rather than saying like, ugh, reacting defensively, like, don't tell me that. I don't want to hear that from you. You're not the kind of person, you didn't deliver that right to me, that you didn't deliver that message right to me. You can start by saying, thank you. You'll catch them off guard, first of all, if you say, thank you for telling me about this weakness, because now I know where I should spend my time to get the biggest bang for my buck, of where I can show you my greatest potential for growth. You're saying I'm here, that I have fallen short of your expectations. Great. I can show you how I can, in the next couple of weeks, catch up and exceed what you think is possible.
Nice. I think all of this is very valuable in the sense of like, as an individual, I find this so useful and interesting, and I can't help but think how it can also be applied when it comes to like teams, organizations. How do you feel this all fits in work-wise or team-wise?
Sure. If we want to bring it back to the idea of visuals, and visuals being so powerful, take a minute to look around your workplace and what's on the walls, what's on your cubicle walls, what's just outside the elevators when you first walk up the elevators and get into a lobby of the floor of your department. What's on those walls? Now, of course, it's different. Every place is different. But, when I did that exercise and with a couple companies that I walked into, I was noticing for some of these major companies, what's on the wall in the break room, what's on the wall just outside of the elevator bank. Major elevator banks are sort of like mission statements or their philosophies, a statement about their corporate culture. They have single words like be all you can be, or looking forward to tomorrow and the possibilities. Yeah. So there's stuff like that. And when you start paying attention, think about, is it communicating, oh, change might happen and is possible? Or is it reflecting back on the past? Is it encouraging you to be the best, be all you can be? Or is it saying like, there's room for you to grow? Oftentimes, these mission statements, the philosophies, the corporate culture statements are communicated in a way that is either in that fixed language, that trait-like language that I'm saying is dangerous. And sometimes it can be communicated in a sense of suggesting like, we might not have the story right now. There's room for us to expand and innovate and grow, which is acknowledging that there might be some deficiencies with how things work right now. And that's okay, because tomorrow is a different day. There's opportunities for growth tomorrow. So oftentimes we probably don't pay attention to that stuff that we see on the walls consciously, but it's getting in there outside of our awareness. Our eyes are picking up on it, and our brain is processing it, even if we aren't aware in this moment. Oh, this is diagnostic of Carol Dweck's fixed language versus Carol Dweck's growth language.
So you said as well in the book that there's ways that we can condition and or design our environment to actually foster motivation in ourselves. I thought it was fascinating.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, when we come back again to that idea of visuals, one of the basic ideas here is that what we see predicts what we do. You can think about this maybe in terms of health. To me, these are the easiest examples to think about. And there was a really interesting case study done at Google. Google, of course, there's lots of things Google is famous for, but one of them is their snacks and all the free food that Google has available. They have, if you ever get the chance to walk through one of Google's office spaces, you'll see like around every corner is a fridge with awesome beverages in it. There's tables that have all kinds of treats and, beer taps coming out of the walls. So fun place to be. But the problem is that, maybe say you're walking down the hall to go to a meeting, or you're just getting a couple more steps in before you got to sit down and do some work for a couple hours. Every time you're walking those halls, your eyes are picking up on these treats. And what we see predicts what we do. You start to feel a little bit hungrier than you would had you not seen that cue to eat something that, your body finds instantly gratifying. So what Google realized is that by having all these snack stations, they were literally making their employees fat. They were packing on pounds because of these snack stations. People's weight was increasing just by simply working at Google. So what they thought was, okay, taking this idea of what we see predicts what we do, can we shape their visual experience without taking away this perk that people are really excited about? But can we have sort of a non-conscious influence on the amount of snacking they do? So concretely, what they did was put, the unhealthy beverages like the full sugar sodas lower in the fridge, not at eye level. And they put some of the like M&Ms or the unhealthy treats in opaque containers, not glass, but like frosted glass instead. They didn't change the availability of the treats. They just changed how easy was it for your eyes to spot them. And the people who restocked those pantries or those snack counters every day counted how much of each product was being consumed. And so when Google made that change to making the unhealthy snacks harder to see, they also saw that consumption of them decreased. So that to me is a really compelling example of how changing our visual environment can have an unintended and in this case, a better, healthier outcome for the behaviors that we choose to engage in.
Fascinating.
Want to go ahead, Ido?
So on the topic of exercise, which you mentioned, something that we often associate with goal setting as it has a major impact on our overall health. One aspect that I thought it was interesting was the perception of a challenge ahead of us, that the perception of a challenge ahead of us varies depending on our own physical state. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Mm-hmm. One of the things about exercise is that it's a very mental activity. Of course, our body is required to do the job, but our mind needs to be invested in it too. So when we look at the world around us, our mind gets involved and it starts telling us like, you can't do that, or you can do that. When you say like, oh, I want to walk to that building, looks really cool, I'm going to go check it out, I'm going to walk down there, or the top of that mountain looks amazing, I'm going to try to get up there. Our eyes are involved in assessing whether that's possible or not. So vision is tied into our beliefs, our sense of capability, and that our visual experience is also informed by states of our body. Now, coming out of my lab and many other research labs, what scientists are finding is that being heavier or experiencing chronic fatigue or chronic pain, being tired or being temporarily depleted of physical resources like having low blood sugar makes the world look more challenging to exercise in. Distances look further, hills look steeper, and heights to ascend look taller. Now, the distances are exactly the same to the person who weighs more or weighs less. The distance is actually the same, but their visual experience of it changes. When the visual experience changes, then their beliefs about what is possible also change. And we start to feel like, I can't take this on. This is going to be really challenging. And when you start to feel deflated like that, then you invest less to try to get the job done. So that's part of this, like, a visual illusion that our body is creating for us that is making it more difficult for us to exercise. We did some work with Olympic athletes, some of the world's fastest runners. I had a chance to talk with them and ask them about the strategies that they use when they're looking around, to just understand. Maybe they have a different visual experience than the rest of us. It was definitely different than what I thought it would be. When I asked them, do you have like this superpower of vision? Are you aware of what's in front of you, who's on the sides, what's behind you? Like, can you see all around you? Or are you really narrowly focused on what's ahead or some combination? What all of these athletes that I talked to, people who'd won gold medals at Olympic Games, the fastest person out of Trinidad, all of these athletes told me that they focus, that they are narrowly focused. They're not paying attention to who's on the side or who's behind them or where they are relative to the competition. They're just focused on a target. It could be the finish line when they're running short distances, or it could be some like sub goal that they've set if they're running something further. And then once they hit that, they reset another sub goal. And I thought, okay, they are doing something different than what I thought would be the case. I wonder if I can teach that to people. I wonder if we can teach them to do what Olympic runners do. Could it change their experience when they're trying to walk farther or run faster? Even if they're overweight or experiencing other physical limitations that would make exercise more challenging? And the answer is yes. It's really easy to teach people to imagine that they have blinders on, to imagine a spotlight is shining just at one target up ahead, to not pay attention to their peripheral vision. As I said those words, maybe you tried that yourself of having that experience. It's very easy to teach people to do that. And when we taught people to do that, what we found is that it induced an illusion of proximity. That finish line that we set up for them now looked closer to them than if they looked in a more holistic, natural way where they paid attention to what was in their periphery, what I thought runners do, and what they probably thought was the best thing to do too. So we induced that illusion of proximity. That finish line looked closer. Now that changes their psychology. They thought, oh, that doesn't seem so hard to get there. I bet I can do it. They've geared themselves up motivationally. And then what we found is that they walked and ran 23% faster and said it hurt 17% less. The distance was the same, but their experience of it was really different. We increased the efficiency of their exercise, and the reported pain or effort was less than it would have been if they had looked in a different way. So that was something that was really exciting to us, of finding the strategy for changing how people look and showing, marked consequential differences for the quality of their exercise.
Fascinating.
Fascinating, yes. So it seems to me that what you're saying is that we can find ways to physically hack our visual perception, right? So I want to change the question a bit. And in your research, have you found any way to hack our visual perception through our bodies and the chemicals in our bodies? We already talked about this a bit, but I would like to go deeper. And what I mean by that is what we eat, the substances we consume, how do they alter our visual perception and at the same time our mind and how we perceive reality?
Yeah. So, this is a little bit outside of my area of expertise. A lot of people study the effects of different things that one might consume on visual experience. But I can offer a few different insights. One that we did in our own lab was, sort of like the way medical scientists approach asking this question. We created a triple blind experiment. We had people drink a drink. It was Kool-Aid. It's kind of like this powdered flavoring that you can add to water, very chemically enhanced. Kids like it, adults not so much. But it needs a sweetener. So for some people, we sweetened it with sugar. That actually provides caloric value. For others, we sweetened it with Splenda, artificial. It's non-caloric sweetening agent. So because of how Kool-Aid actually tastes, people couldn't tell the difference between whether it was sweetened with sugar or whether it was sweetened with Splenda. They had guesses, but they weren't able to guess at above level chance levels of accuracy. People weren't right about whether they were drinking sugar or Splenda. Why we did that, though, is that we wanted to give some people energy. They consumed something that would actually give their body more energy, or we held them at a baseline level of energy by giving them the Splenda. We did blood glucose testing, so we know that we increased their circulating blood sugar levels when they drank that Kool-Aid sweetened with sugar. And then we had them appraise their environment. How far away is that finish line? If you were to exercise, you are going to exercise right now. How far away is that finish line? And what we found is that people who were given the physical resources, who consumed energy, saw that finish line as closer than people who hadn't been given more energy. And again, they didn't know what they were drinking. The researcher who gave them the beverage didn't know whether they were giving sugar or giving Splenda. And the graduate student who's analyzing the data didn't know whether people in this column had been given the sugar or the Splenda. So that's the way in which we're saying it models medical science, in that it's a blind experiment, not blind in the sense of visuals, but that people didn't know themselves, should I be feeling energized or not? And the person administering the test didn't know, should this person be seeing it as closer or further away? So nobody could be artificially changing the results of the study.
Interesting.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll add is that, there's a lot of effects of mood. So when we're talking about things that we can consume that would alter our visual experience, there's a lot of research showing that being in a positive mood versus a negative mood changes our scope of attention. That when we're in a positive mood, we have a broader attentional scope. And when we're in a negative mood, we have a more narrowed attentional scope. So you, for yourself, can think about, what puts me in a good mood, and those substances that I can consume that put me in a good mood, that can expand my focus of attention. Now, in terms of exercise, I'm saying the narrowed focus of attention was really helpful. So does that mean that I should be in a bad mood when I'm running and that would be useful? No. We're talking about different tools that could be useful at different times. Sometimes we need a more expansive style of attention when we're trying to brainstorm new possibilities, when we need to keep our mind open to what's out there? What can I take advantage of? Where are new resources? We need a more broad style of attention, and a positive mood can do that. And if consuming brownies, CBD candies does that for you, then you can use those tools that you have, consume what you want, to conscientiously take advantage of your mood, change your mood to produce the kinds of consequences for attention that would be useful.
So we've spoken about setting up the right goals. We've spoken about making sure that we have a plan for it. We've spoken about how to motivate you, or use all these resources to motivate you. There's one topic that you touch upon in the book, and you give the example of two examples. You get Carrie Smith Nicholson and got a marathon runner, or as well. It just escapes my mind. But you specifically talked about the importance of tracking progress and keeping us accountable. Can you tell us a little bit about their stories and how they apply to this?
Sure. So for all of us, our memories are fallible and they make mistakes. And that's generally beneficial. If we remembered everything that we ever did, first of all, our brain would be overwhelmed. We wouldn't be able to make sense of new stuff coming into our cognitive system. Second of all, we'd probably feel pretty bad about ourselves. It's useful for us to forget our faux pas, the mistakes we've made, the embarrassing things that have happened. That can be useful for us for trying again. We can't remember all of our failures if we want to try them again. There's a caveat on that you can read more about, but generally it's useful that our brain makes mistakes. But it's not useful if we want to be able to assess where are we really at? How are we doing? Because we have a tendency to remember the best in ourselves, that we are set up to give more weight to what's good about us, what's good about our experiences for most of us, to relish in those positive memories. That can be challenging for knowing where are we really at when we're starting here and we need to get here. So not all of us would resonate with that. Some of us feel like, no, I really dwell on the negative, or like I ruminate over my mistakes. Actually, that describes me. I think that I just like, it's hard for me to get off of those negatives. So in the book, I talk about a goal that I set for myself and trying all of these strategies that I talk about on myself. So when my kid was a few months old, my first son was a few months old, I decided I want to become a drummer. I felt like I just wasn't cool anymore. I was just changing diapers and feeding a baby, stuck at home. And I was like, I used to be interesting and I am no longer interesting. Maybe I'll be interesting if I learn how to play drums and learn how to play one rock song on a drum kit and like really be able to perform it. So I set that goal for myself while also trying to figure out how to be a mom for the first time. And my kid was in his first year of life. It was a really dumb goal. Trying to play drums while your kid is also trying to nap isn't really effective. But it was a goal that I set for myself and I wanted to see it through. So one of the things was that I was going to perform. I had set a date. I'd sent out invitations. I was going to play this song for people to make myself to have a deadline. And I was really nervous about it. I kept, I was practicing. I am a musician, but I'm not a drummer. I am not coordinated. This was really tricky for me to figure out. And I just kept feeling like I am getting nowhere. People are going to show up to listen to me and I can't play. I am just an embarrassment to myself. Why did I do this? And that's the thought that just kept going through my head. I'm not improving. I'm practicing. Yeah, but I'm not improving and I'm not practicing enough to close the gap. But I was thinking about and writing about accountability and the fallibility of memory. And I wondered, do I actually have it right? Am I making progress or not? Am I practicing enough or am I not? So I got an app on my phone called the Reporter app. There's lots of apps that are like this. It randomly pings your phone throughout the day and asks you questions that you've told it to ask you. So I had it ping me between 3 and 5 times a day to ask me, did you practice since last time I asked you? Generally, the answer was no. But if yes, how did you feel about it? And just jot down a few words to describe my experience. I did that for a month. I let my phone ask me 3 to 5 times a day, every day for a month. Then I downloaded all that data. I like data and I analyzed it. And what I found was that I actually practiced more than I remembered practicing. And in the course of a month, my adjectives describing how I felt went from very swear words, naughty words, and bad words about how I felt to including like, I cried. I can't stop crying. I'm so awful, to like, oh, that's not so bad. I actually got a compliment from my husband, who's actually a drummer. He said I played really well. I'm feeling better. So because I have a tendency to focus on the negative, it was hard for me to see what was a nominal, but linearly increasing pattern of improvement, because my brain isn't set up in a way to help me remember, first of all, every one of those experiences, and to accurately give weight to each one of those experiences to find the pattern that really did exist. So the cases that you're talking about, that you set up the question with, about this marathon runner, and this woman that you mentioned, whose issue she was trying to solve was that she was in debt. She had tremendous amount of debt. She was now a single person. She had just experienced a divorce. So she's got to figure out how to pay off this debt. So she was tracking her expenses. She didn't have a good handle. Her memory didn't have a good handle on where's her money going, and can she make better intentional choices about how she spends her money in order to pay off her debt. So she did the same thing, tracked every one of her expenses, didn't leave it up to her memory to try to remember where the bills in her wallet went, or what her credit card was actually being spent on, what that total monthly bill was being spent on. She looked at it in a detailed way, and she got a better insight into what her patterns are, just like I did when I was trying to learn how to drum. So that's something, regardless of what your goal is, that we can keep in mind. If we just let our brains try to remember, where did we start? Where are we now? Are we halfway? Are we beyond halfway? Are we not? We're going to do a pretty bad job. We need to figure out a different way to become our own accountant. That's the phrase I like using, be your own accountant, and collect data on yourself so you can figure out what's really happening for you.
Now, you said that was a dumb goal, but I gotta say that the whole goal that you set yourself for learning how to play that song in the drums was a powerful vehicle, because all the book is actually built around your journey towards that. Which, by the way, good thing that you didn't spoil how did the performance go.
Yeah.
But I do gotta say it also speaks to the fact of that we can apply all of these to many different areas. There's the corporate applications to this. There's in our personal life to achieve both cognitive and physical goals. That's what is so powerful. So we really appreciate it, and the book is definitely fascinating.
Thank you very much. It's fun to chat with you guys about it.
Absolutely. So the book is called Clearer, Closer, Better: How Successful People See the World. It is written by Dr. Emily Balcetis. Dr. Balcetis, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much.
Caribe Radio, nos proponemos ser la emisora online calificada para ser la mejor opción en comunicación para usted. Nos preparamos en noticias, deportes, cultura, música y de entretenimiento general para que usted esté conectado todo el tiempo con nosotros. Caribe Radio ofrece el mejor servicio de comunicación digital para que las empresas se hagan visibles a diferentes públicos. Desde lo público trabajamos para el servicio y por el servicio social. Caribe Radio Online nos entrenamos día a día para brindar la mejor opción en producción de medios digitales. Caribe Radio, la radio del futuro.